Hey, I'm Allison from Learning at the Primary Pond. I'm a literacy specialist, and in this video, I'm going to share with you 6 of my favorite ways to build fluency with your kindergarten, first grade, and second grade students. Most of these strategies are most appropriate for first grade and up, and they are all supported by research about what is most effective in improving fluency in our students. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, make sure to do that now, and then also hit the little bell so that you're notified every time I post a brand new video about teaching literacy in K-2. Okay, so fluency. What is fluency, right? You might have heard of or thought of fluency as reading speed. Can kids read quickly? How many words per minute can they read? And that is one dimension of it, but that's not everything when it comes to fluency. Fluency also encompasses things like, are kids reading at an appropriate pace, right? Like if they're speed reading, that's not good either. We want them to be reading at an appropriate pace. We want them to be reading with a high level of accuracy, because if they're reading super quickly or even at an appropriate pace, but they're reading the words wrong, then that's not good fluency either, right? Expression is also important. So, are they changing their voice when a character is angry or happy? Are they pausing at punctuation marks? Are they making their voice go up if they see a question mark because it's a question? So all of these things are part of reading fluency. I also want to mention how important phonics knowledge is, because, like I said, part of fluency is being able to decode the words accurately. And if they can't decode the words accurately in the first place, then reading fluency is not going to be great. So all of these activities that I'm going to share with you are helpful, but you've got to make sure that you have a really good phonics instruction in place first so that you can also work on fluency and have something to build on. So it's not necessarily that they have to master all of phonics before they start working on reading fluency. It's just that you've got to have that instruction going on as well. Kind of a side note, but an important side note, I think. Okay, fluency. So we got phonics that builds to fluency, but fluency is also important not just for fluency's sake, but because it can impact reading comprehension. So think about a kid who maybe is reading very slowly and painstakingly. Maybe they're sounding out a lot of words, and it takes them a long time. Their comprehension is not going to be as good as a student who is reading at a good pace, maybe good expression, attention to punctuation. The student who's reading more quickly, or more fluently, I should say, is going to have better comprehension because more of their working memory is freed up to focus on that. If you're just so focused on reading the words and the words are coming out very slowly, then you're not really going to be able to focus on comprehending, understanding the text. So fluency is important. It builds from phonics knowledge and practice, and fluency also contributes to comprehension. So it's one important piece of the reading puzzle. And it is important to have some type of fluency practice every single day. Doesn't mean that you need to spend an hour on fluency specific activities. Fluency building can actually be integrated into lots of things that you're already doing, and you probably are doing lots of fluency building activities, as you're going to see when I go through 6 of my favorite activities. I do have a question for you though before we get into the activities. I am curious. Do you have some kids who are reading like a robot, very choppily, or do you have some kids who are speeding through the text, like speed demons? They're not paying attention to punctuation and they may not be comprehending the text. So let me know in the comments right now. You can just say too fast if you have a lot of kids reading too fast, or too slow if you have a lot of kids reading too slowly. Or you could write both, because sometimes you have kids that are reading too quickly and sometimes you have other kids that are reading too slowly. These are very common, right? These activities that we're going to go over are going to help with this. So activity number 1 is to simply have students listen to other fluent readers every single day. You probably do read alouds, right? You're reading aloud text to them. It could be during your literacy block. It could also even be during science or social studies when you're reading things to them. You're reading content to them. So read aloud time is great for building fluency, or rather for modeling fluency. That's what you're doing when you're reading to them. You're modeling fluent reading. You can even point out, hey, do you notice how I'm not reading too fast, but I'm not reading too slow? Or did you notice how I changed my voice because the character was excited? So you can, in addition to modeling, you can kind of point things out as you go as well. Another way for kids to get more exposure to fluent reading is to have some kind of listening center. That could be something on the iPad, a recording. GetEpic.com is a great resource for digital books for the kids to read that's free for teachers, and you can have them listen to the books, which is great for building fluency. So having kids listen to fluent reading every day is a good first step in guiding them to being fluent readers as well. Okay, so activity number 1 is to model fluent reading or to expose kids to fluent reading every day. Activity number 2 is actually the opposite, to model disfluent reading. Not every day, right? But we're giving them examples of what it should sound like, but we also need to contrast that with what it shouldn't sound like. So what you can do for this is it can just be like a quick mini lesson where you model some fluent reading, and then you stop and you say, okay, I'm going to read this part of the text a little bit differently, and I want you to listen to it, see what you think, and notice what's different. So after you read fluently, then start reading part of the text, maybe like a robot, or maybe sometimes it's too quick, and sometimes it's too slow. Just model very disfluent reading. So the kids will probably think this is funny, but then after you stop, say, what did you notice? What was different? And after you have that discussion, explain, oh yeah, this reading wasn't as fluent. Sometimes I was going too fast. Just like point out exactly what you were doing. Maybe you weren't attending to punctuation marks. Point out the things that you weren't doing correctly. And then you want to model and maybe have the kids actually help you reread that same chunk of text that you read disfluently, but fluently this time. So you're like doing a do-over. You're having them help you fix it. So that's just giving a non-example of what disfluent reading sounds like. Now, when you do this, you want to make sure to help kids understand that when they're reading a text for the first time, or if they're reading something that's challenging, their reading might sound like that. And that's okay, but what they need to do is go back and read it again so that it can be more fluent, so that they can pay more attention to what the text means. So we're not trying to throw shade, as they say, to kids that are reading disfluently. We don't want them to feel bad about it. We just want them to understand that, like, if a text is hard, or if it's the first time they're reading something, it could sound like that, but that's why we go back and we read things again so that we can sound more fluent. And you can even explain to them, we're not just, practicing this so that you sound better as a reader. We're practicing this so that, number 1, it feels really good for you and it feels easier. And number 2, you can focus on what the author is saying because you're not so focused on like figuring out the words, and you're reading at an appropriate pace. So you can tell them the why behind it as well. I do feel like that's always helpful. All right, so moving on to activity number 3. This is to provide partner reading opportunities. So this actually kind of ties into activity 1, where we were talking about having kids listen to fluent reading. So more likely than not, you're going to want to pair any students who struggle with fluency or reading in general with students who are more fluent readers so that they have an opportunity to hear that. So it's an opportunity for them to perhaps hear more fluent reading, but also it's an opportunity for them to get feedback. A research-based best practice in improving kids' fluency is to provide them with opportunities for feedback. And that, of course, can come from you as the teacher, but there's probably a lot of students that you have. So with a partner reading opportunity, the kids can be taught to provide each other feedback. So there's different ways to do this, but I really find that a rubric is helpful, because to just say, okay, give feedback on your partner's fluency, the kids might not know what that means. So I broke it down here on this little rubric into expression. So I like kind of explained to them what that is, but of course you have to model how to use the rubric a couple of times first. Smoothness, pace, meaning like the speed, and volume, because some kids will read like super quietly, right? So I kind of rolled that into fluency feedback, this fluency feedback rubric. So you model how to do this. You might have a student volunteer come up and like you read part of a text, and then the student, fills in, do you get 1 star, 2 stars, or 3 stars? So you got to model this several times. But once you've done so, it also says down here, you did a great job with blank. I think you should work on blank. So once the kids know how to do this, you can give them these rubrics, or even just give them, like put a page protector on it so that they can write on it and wipe off, so you can reuse it multiple times. But then you can have them partner read and listen to each other, and then they can use this rubric to give feedback, or even if they don't write on it, it's more about having something to go off of to have that discussion. So have them say something that they did well and have them say something that they believe their partner needs to work on. So partner reading is great for both having them hear fluent reading, but also potentially for having them give feedback to each other, which again is a research-based best practice for improving fluency. Okay, activity number 4. This time we're going to talk about small group instruction, your small group reading instruction. So in your small groups, you might work on blending, you might work on certain comprehension strategies, great, but also make time for fluency practice and fluency teaching points. So just for an example, you might say, okay, today, first graders or second graders, as you're reading, I'm going to be listening for students to stop and take a quick breath at the end of every sentence. Because you might have kids who are like just go, go, go through the text, but you want to hear a little bit more pausing. You could also incorporate commas, right? So you probably don't want to throw too much at them at once. This particular teaching point I mentioned was just for periods at the end. You could also do this with commas. So then you have the kids read and their attention is supposed to be focused on that, and you're kind of listening to see if they're doing it. And one thing that you could do with this particular example is you could have them, if it's like a printed out text that they can write on, you could actually have them highlight the punctuation marks ahead of time so that they pay more attention to that. And then after they've read the text, of course, talk about what the text means, but then also like comprehension wise, but then also have them rate themselves. How do they do with this focus strategy? Were they, taking a breath at the end of each sentence? Were they paying attention to punctuation marks? So I know that there's a lot of different skills that you might be working on in small group, but don't forget to incorporate fluency teaching points as well, because it's such a good opportunity because you're right there with the kids, right at your table, and you can actually hear how they're doing with whatever fluency teaching point you have asked them to focus on. Okay, activity number 5 is to create opportunities for the students to hear their own reading. If you don't know what your own reading sounds like, which is kind of harder for kids as they're learning to read, then they're not going to know if they are engaging in fluent reading behaviors or not. So they need those opportunities to hear their own reading voices. So there's a number of ways to do this. A very basic way is just to use like a whisper phone. You can get these pretty inexpensively on Amazon or wherever else. I think this one is from Amazon, but it's funny, but you just have them like maybe in small group or when they're reading independently, it kind of amplifies their reading voice so they can hear, pay more attention. It just kind of focuses their attention on how their reading sounds. And it also, I feel like in a way, it cuts down on distractions or like noises throughout the classroom. So it really helps them hear their own reading, which will then hopefully help them evaluate their own fluency. And you could even give them this type of rubric or make your own to evaluate their own fluency. This, by the way, is in my first grade literacy center bundles. I think it's in the partner reading component. Anyway, so whisper reading, good way to have them hear their own voices. Another thing you can do is actually to have them record their own voices. Nowadays, there's lots of things you can use to record. You could use like a tablet, a computer. You probably have at least one device, hopefully, that you have access to that the kids can record their own voices on. And it's not something that I have them do like all the time, but every once in a while they can record their own reading, listen back, self-evaluate, but then have them read it again, right? Because we don't just want to say, oh, I didn't do so good with this, now I'm moving on. No, we want to practice. We want to reread. More on rereading in a second for activity number 6, but we want them to improve their reading of a given passage, because when they read a passage more than once, that rereading actually helps them build fluency with that passage, but it also can improve their fluency and their reading abilities in other future passages or future texts that they read, right? So have them listen to their own reading, but then have them read again and try to improve their fluency, and you might use a self-assessment tool like this rubric. Okay, activity number 6, I saved the best for last. No, all of these are great, but activity number 6 has to do with rereading. Activity number 5 kind of did as well, but activity number 6 is really focused on how to make rereading engaging for your kiddos. So rereading is one of the best, according to research, ways for kids to improve their fluency. But one challenge is that sometimes it's not so much fun for them to read the same text over and over and over. So we have to create meaningful opportunities for them to reread. And that's why activity number 6 is to add in some drama. So I don't know if you've ever heard of Reader's Theater, but basically it's kind of like a little play. This also is actually from my first grade Literacy Center bundle. But basically, like, this is an example of The Mouse and the Lion, which is a common folk tale. And what I did is I turned it into, it's a script, so it has like one kid being the lion, one kid being the mouse, and they have little lines to read. And you can have them perform these little plays for each other. It doesn't have to be like a whole class performance because that can seem intimidating to some kids. I mean, I'm sure some kids love it as well. But you can, have partners or small groups that are reading their Reader's Theater scripts several times and then doing them for each other. But the way this relates to rereading is that when kids perform, you have to tell them like, hey, you want to do a good job. You want your lines to be correct. You want to be able to read with expression so the play seems real. And so for that reason, they're going to have to practice their lines multiple times. So what this does is it creates a natural, meaningful opportunity for kids to practice rereading. Because yes, like, have them reread stories or little books or passages, but this is a very meaningful opportunity when you build in this, drama for them to reread texts. And that will undoubtedly, over time with practice, improve how your kids are doing with their fluency. Okay, so I hope these 6 activities were helpful to you. Remember back at the very beginning, I said how important it is for students to have a good phonics foundation because that contributes strongly to their reading fluency. Super important, right? I actually have a little phonics related gift for you. If you want some free multisensory phonics activities for your 1st and 2nd grade students, I am going to include a little link along with this video so you can get access to those. Again, those are great for practicing phonics, which can, of course, build their fluency as well. All right, thanks so much for watching. I hope this was helpful. Hit the like button, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.